Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about C.N. Kodra's poetry collection, Under and Adirondack Moon. Now, I was raised in Western New York, actually in Rochester, but I spent a lot of time as a kid camping in the Adirondacks, so I have a very personal, strong connection and love for the Adirondacks region. So that's really what drew me to this collection originally. It's an interesting book of poems. On the one hand, this feels more like what I would think of thematically as Appalachian or Southern literature. Like this is basically a collection about the author's father growing up in the 1920s up through I forget what year he dies. I want to say 2006, but that might be wrong. But I mean, basically, her dad's life in the latter portion of the 20th century in rural upstate New York in the Adirondacks region. And so there's a lot of farming elements here. There's a lot of fishing, hunting, raising horses, these sort of rural things, rural imagery, rural themes that, at least today, I tend to associate more with Southern literature or literature from Appalachia, West Virginia, Tennessee, Kentucky, places like this, rather than New York State. Like, I think today, like if you said to someone, imagine a New York poet, probably not somebody writing about farm life would be the thing that someone would picture. So it's really kind of an interesting one in that way. But I think also the counterpoint to this would be somebody like Robert Frost, who's a New England poet, but who's very much in this tradition of rural life, the pastoral, etc., etc. So there's a lot of poems in here very much dealing with farm life and the sort of difficulties of growing up on a farm. And I want to read just two of them because this first one I really like. This is the first poem in the collection called Loving Mountains More for the Adirondack Mountains. And this is one of the ones, there are these poems that are sort of geographically oriented, focused on the geography, the geology, the space of the Adirondacks. And then there are others that are more sort of farm life based. So the first one here, Loving Mountains More, this one is one of the sort of geologically focused poems where it's about the space, the place of the Adirondacks. Loving Mountains More for the Adirondack Mountains. Stay longer than a breath, for the mountain inhales deeper than grass or sand or even bodies of water. Under the craggy face hulks a lung, a bellows drawing cool, earthy air, exhaling the damp, quivering heart of stone. Lose yourself in billowing breaths swooping through cave-hardened space. The fierce edge of life bleeds through mineral veins, glaciates cells one by one, stalactites echoing the slow syllables of your new voice pooling in the mirror beneath your feet. So we have, again, these poems that are directed toward the physical area, but a lot of the poems, I would say the bulk of the poems are concerned with life on the farm or life in the timber camps or whatever it is, because there's a number of different characters who do different types of jobs, mostly farming, but also some people who are in the logging industry, some people who do other things at different points. So this is one that I really like about sort of rural life. It's called Walking to the Outhouse in Winter, 1962, Trout Pond, New York. Let's take a trip to the outhouse before bed. These words my grandmother said as though headed up to the Five and Dime or Santa's workshop in Upper J, as though we'd have pumpkin pie when we returned to our kitchen to recount our fun. As if the moon spill as if the moon might spill milk on the crust of snow, and my boots pulled over pajama legs would crunch across the shimmered yard to the odd little shed, its door cut with magical crescent and sun so that both man and woman, boy and girl could enter there, as though our bottoms wouldn't settle on the wooden rims of holes, their view the very bowels of earth, the dank rot of dirt, and that which exits our bodies and fascinates with visceral smells exhaled, odors we spend a lifetime denying, our nostrils all the while perked to aromas of bodily fluids, waste, the sense of inner workings, as if we wouldn't pretend to ignore all we evict with the slow creak of the door, the draught of warmer air within carried candle lit and placed on a rough shelf board, as though we wouldn't shut ourselves away from starlight with the heavy catalogue for browsing, the thinnest pages torn to wipe, as if we could muzzle the animal in us, cover our scat with soap and shame, loose from our core the very iron of blood, black rust of being, the flood of excrement we shun once we learn to walk upright, as though wholly human. None of this discussed on our trek back to the house, nor before I turned in for the night, where carnal breath clung to my pillow and stirred my dreams. So I think that's a really, really fascinating poem, and most of them are not quite like that in the sort of direct, visceral sense necessarily, but the ideas of the physical experience of living on the farm, living in this space where everything is tactile. The engagement with farm machinery, tractors, the engagement with fishing rods or guns for hunting, the engagement with animals, everything is tactile, everything is visceral. And I think that poem is a really, really great example of that sort of bodily connection to the space that characterizes life in these poems. But the other big theme in Under an Adirondack Moon is loss, nostalgia, mourning. Because this is a collection that the author wrote. She had gone through her dad's memoirs that he just sort of wrote with no intention of publication or anything like that. And so this poetry collection is a kind of memorial poetry collection to her dad. And so a lot of it is about his experience, but then a lot of it is also about the experience of losing loved ones. So that's the other big component here. And I'm going to read you a couple of poems on this theme. The first of which that I'm going to read is very directly about this theme, this sort of sense of loss, this sense of mortality, and so on and so on. It's called Homemade Coffin. Son, build this box of planed and sanded spruce, though let the boards cure long to store my worth. Their shade no longer falls across the house, no stand of wood, new light to air my hearth. Then lay these limbs in balsam boughs and pine, add cedar branches. Shortly I must leave the trees behind, so clothe my body plain. A flannel shirt and slacks will rightly serve. The wedding ring I wear does not hold tight, but circles loose. Remove it from my hand. I need no gold to bind me with its weight. I'll make my journey weightless from this land. My purpose unencumbered now by mass, my spirit free of gravity at last. So again, even in this poem, even in these poems of longing and mourning and loss, we still have that very visceral, physical experience of things. The last one I want to read you is called Adirondack Moon. It is another poem of loss, but it's also a poem that's very overtly about remembering and the challenges of remembering. Because again, this is a kind of memorial collection for the author's father. She wrote this for him, but she also talks about earlier generations of the family. And so this poem, Adirondack Moon, deals with the again, the struggle to remember, but also the ways in which remembering matters. Adirondack Moon, Upper J, New York. From far above Haystack Mountain, you aim your beam on named stones below, my father's kin, back to the Civil War. One grave moans Moses, whispers that he served. Here under your pallid light lie my father's father and mother, great aunt and uncle, others whose lineage blurs with first blood memory to preserve their worth. In your bluish pall, wild violets and red clover fade to a slur near the plot where my father rests. Scattered next to him, my mother's ashes have sifted underground, rain and gravity, bearing them down, atom by atom, toward his broken heart. On the other side, his golden retriever's remains drift their way through soil, chasing the faded alpha scent. A finger of your phosphorescence strokes a small, rough stone, leaning alone at the edge of the lot. Baby Emily. Who here might have claimed her? Who is left to ask? You cast your luster over the simple mark she made on this world, brief but startling. So again, I think it's a really, really interesting poem that brings together these elements of the visceral physical experience of the world, rural life with the flower imagery, the imagery of the hunting dog, etc., etc., the ideas of loss, the ideas of memory, the father's ashes, or the father's grave, someone clearly remembered by the author and memorialized by the poem. Great ancestor Moses, who served during the Civil War, someone remembered throughout the collection, but whose life is somewhat shrouded in a sort of family mythology. But then also this experience of lost memory. The grave of baby Emily, that no one alive today knows who she was, whose child she was, what were the circumstances of her death, etc., etc. So these challenges of memory, these challenges of loss, these challenges of telling family stories and making sense out of a world that is both deeply physical but also significant, symbolic in a way. Like the ways that memory, the ways that identity work are rooted in these systems of memory.